every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me.
And the Incarnational tradition also subtitled Discovering the Sacramental Life. And I want to start with a discipline that the pastor suggested we put at the end, and we'll have it at the end as well. It'll be on the screen at the end, and you can read it with me, but I wanted to give it to us twice. The discipline that helps us to carry out and live the incarnational life. And here is the discipline that we may hopefully commit ourselves to. By God's grace, I will joyfully seek to show forth the presence of God in all that I am, and in all that I do, and in all that I say. A pretty high calling, isn't it? But there is a scripture that undergirds this. The pastor read that this morning, and I remember it by heart from the old King James Version, probably. And whatever you do, do it all in word. Whatever you do in word and deed, do it all in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God the Father. But I like the words of Peterson in his message, and this is how he paraphrases this. He says, let every detail of your lives, words, actions, whatever, be done in the name of the Master, Jesus, thanking God the Father every step of the way. And we do have a lot of steps, don't we, in this journey? Some of us are really much closer to moving on to be with the Lord than others here. But every step of the way, we are challenged to live our lives so that the presence of God touches everything we touch. And that is a very high calling, of course. And we're to do this in the name of the Lord. What does that mean to do it in the name of the Lord? Well, it means to be consistent with God's character, or Jesus' character, his will, and his desires. To be consistent with what God wants, not what I want, and what my motivation and desire might be sometimes. And every step of the way, we are to move in that direction, focus our lives there. It's subtitled Discovering the Sacramental Life. And when I was a youngster, I went to church and I saw people taking communion. At 18, when I was converted, I went off to Bible school and began to learn a little bit about the sacraments. What is it? What is the sacrament all about anyway? Like when we have the bread and the cup, what is that about? And one of the statements of description that you probably have heard many times was given to me in those early days at Bible school. And it really is describing a sacrament as a visible sign of an invisible reality. A sign visible of the invisible God of grace and goodness, the one who has come among us in Christ Jesus. A visible sign of an invisible reality. So that helps me to understand the incarnational tradition a little bit. But John helps us as well in that wonderful Christmas passage. At least that's what we tend to call it. And John says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. Peterson puts it down to earth a little bit more for us when he says, the Word became flesh and moved into our neighborhood. I like that. God moved into my neighborhood when I was 18 years of age. And long before that, actually, as he worked through other people to bring God's love to that little boy's life. And God has moved into our neighborhood in Jesus Christ. I appreciate the songs this morning. The upbeat one first, it was really upbeat. Talked about a little bit about coming to a cradle in the dirt. It was kind of an incarnational song to begin with. And then the second song was a story, wasn't it? It was the gospel story. Earth, death, resurrection. Wonderful songs and easy to sing. And so he moved into our neighborhood. And so what do you suppose we're supposed to do? We are kind of incarnate in the sense that the Holy Spirit has come into our lives. He is our most precious gift, isn't he? Is this presence of God in my heart of hearts. And I am to move through his direction into my neighborhoods. We have all kinds of neighborhoods, if you want to call it that. I have one that's special right around my house, but there are many other things that we do as people, arenas that we move and live in. And so we are to move into the neighborhood so that our neighbors, those people we work with or whoever, sense that there is a God, that there's something to be said for this matter of Christianity. Now, as I move on here, I want to bridge into another story. I do appreciate the Susanna story. It's an amazing woman that she was, and a good teacher for her son, John, to kind of smarten up and say, yeah, maybe the laity got something can preach too as well as I can or better. And so I like the stories. You know, they're inspirational, aren't they? They are exciting to see what people have actually done with their lives. But sometimes I get intimidated. Do you mean you expect me to do that? Some of these guys, you know, how they lived and what they accomplished. I sometimes feel intimidated, or I sometimes feel, well, some of these stories don't quite apply to 21st century followers of Jesus. And so I tend to look for something contemporary as well. And so I want to bridge into another story, and I've received permission to tell you the story this morning. A story that I can identify with, maybe you can as well, and learn from, and be renewed in our resolve to carry out this discipline of joyfully sharing our lives in the presence of God in our world. But first, another passage. Do we have it on the overhead, the Matthew 13 passage? I probably don't need to do this because we already had it, but it's in a different translation. So I think I'll have you read it with me. And maybe, Pastor, you can sort of lead because I'm rushing my voice a little bit.
Sure.
Okay?
Yep. Let me tell you why you are here. You're here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you use your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. There's another slide.
Now there's another slide, or isn't there on light?
Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on the hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven.
Now, if I was expounding that passage, I probably wouldn't use Peterson. But when I am meditating on how it applies to my life, I find it helpful. And what does he say? Let me tell you why you are here. Is this startling? You know, Peterson, he doesn't mince any words often. Let me tell you why you are here. Jesus says, you are salt, you are light. He doesn't say you will be or you may be. He says, you are salt, disciples. You are light. Jesus took his disciples up under the mountainside, away from the crowd, sat down, gave them the Beatitudes, and taught them what we call the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus then gives this word on our being salt and light. And to me, it's a confidence builder. But that's the last thing I think I am, is salt and light. But he tells me I am. And don't shrink back, go forward. So I say to you, shake and shine. Yes, shake and shine every day, wherever he puts you. Okay? Get the salt out of the salt shaker. It's an old book that we used to read years ago. Okay, I told you that I am bridging to another. This friend of ours was no Mother Teresa. The guy I'm going to tell you about, he was no Mother Teresa. But there's something about Mother Teresa that I did see in this guy. And Malcolm Muggeridge, who was a journalist in England and an author, spent time with the Missionaries of Charity, the sisters, the nuns there in Calcutta. And when Muggeridge was there, he had many opportunities to talk to Mother Teresa. When he went back to England, here's a part of what he wrote. He said, doing something beautiful for God is for Mother Teresa what life is about. Everything in that it is for God becomes beautiful, whatever it may be. Muggeridge continues, God's light shines in them, a light shining and a joy abounding. This discipline is to be joyfully going into our neighborhoods. And this person I'm thinking of this morning, and whose life has grown on me more and more, and encouraging me in the direction of incarnational living, This gentleman desired, I believe, to make his world a better place. Leave it a better place than how he found it, and to leave his touch. And he desired that the beauty of the Lord would be seen through him. Now, Howard was a family man. Howard had 3 children, a number of grandchildren, and way back when we were a young family and they were a young family in Crossroads, we saw that Carol and Howard loved their children and spent all kinds of time with them. Gerald was in baseball all the time, all summer it seemed like. They did mountain biking and that kind of thing as a family. They had horses, etc. So Howard loved his family and tried to produce something beautiful in his family. He tried to care for them. But the thing I remember most is when we were doing Operation Christmas Child, and we would have a container sitting down on the Sentinel Mall property, and during collection week in November, I would draw up a schedule of certain hours and certain days of the week, and Howard always chose Saturday because he wanted to bring his granddaughter and his grandson. Patty has 3 children, but these 2 were old enough then. To Andrea and maybe Landon, is it? They are really quite grown up now. But he would bring his 2 grandchildren. Howard and I would stand in the doorway, the doors open, and the churches would bring their boxes, and individuals would bring boxes, and some of the community organizations would bring the little shoebox, you know. And so we would put them back, Howard and I, on a table. Little children would grab them and put them in a big container, and then they would find out how many would fit in the container. They're right on the side, how many are in this container. And when they had a little bit more time, they would put the lids, the cover on and tape it. And Howard brought them, I think, because he wanted them to see that there's more to the world than ourselves. And he wanted them to get a little bit of light from somehow us all being together. And he cared for them. And so family was an arena in which Howard was very interested, even though he wouldn't say he was perfect at it. He was also a man of integrity, a tradesman. And you can go everywhere in this community and find a signature of Howard, one of his buildings, almost wherever you go. And you will find that people saw him as a tradesman who was fair, who was faithful. Yeah, he might be firm sometimes because this is the way it needed to be done. He was always a skilled craftsman, and people wanted Howard to build. He had a house to build when, it's 2 years before he died, there was a house the guy wanted him to build, but Howard said, I just don't have the energy for it. Mike from Jacobson Ford. And Howard worked for Mike and Mark at Jacobson Ford, remodeled the room, the showroom, added on to it, and then did the detailing shop on the other side of the property. But the best thing Howard did was build our house. In 1992, he and Peter, along with the architect Gary Schrick, built this house that we still live in, and you would never know, well, maybe you would, but you wouldn't really see much difference in it. It just stands firm and secure there on that little hillside of ours, and it's been the delight of our lives. This is the only home we've ever owned, and my wife won't leave there, so I can't downsize yet. But everyone, like this, and Chris told us recently, I didn't know how long, but Edda, where you live, is called the Village. Howard did all the finishing work over a 2-year period in all those houses that are in the Village near Piccadilly Mall, because he was slowing down a little bit and wasn't wanting to do all the heavy work anymore. So he was a man of integrity in his work. The work world was an important place for Howard, and he excelled at it. He was also a man on a mission. Howard never liked large groups of people. He got really confused and just didn't feel really good about being a part of a large crowd. And it was hard for him to absorb the scriptures. He had some kind of a mental block. And for us pastors, it was a bit frustrating from time to time. But Howard would pick up the gospel and the story of Jesus and discipleship from other stories. He would listen to our stories as pastors, and he'd absorb that somehow. It meant a lot to him. And then I know last years of his life, he was always reading the Daily Bread because he said, you have stories in the Daily Bread. Every day there's a story there, and he could identify with that and pick it up and absorb it, internalize it. And he would say, I'll read one or two of those scriptures, but not all of them that are Daily Bread, because it just couldn't quite get through somehow. And he refers to his childhood and some bad injuries that he had. I don't know how that was true of it. But Pastor Randy recognized that Howard did have a gift of sorts. And he said, Randy, go and have coffee with men. Howard discovered his gift that he's good one-on-one, and that was a wonderful revelation for Howard. And so he began to make friends for Jesus by taking guys out for coffee. Mark and Mike over here, Jacobson, would frequently go with Howard, and he'd call them, or they'd call him, because they respected him so highly. And Randy, who used to be his neighbor when Carol and Howard lived up here a little ways, Randy was a race car guy, and so they would go together to the Mission Raceway. And this guy had a '55 Chev that he had all souped up, powerful car, and Randy got acquainted with him and invited me maybe 3 years ago to have coffee with Randy and me up at Ashley's. And so I got to play with Randy as well. But Howard was tapping into this ability to witness and share his life and to learn from others, kind of one-on-one. I said he was a man on a mission here in town to have coffee with guys, but also in an orphanage in Mexico. Chris told us just recently they went to Mexico 6 times together as a couple. And Howard loved the orphanage and the little children there. And of course, he did his thing in helping to build facilities there. And Chris was so talented and helpful as well. And Howard would tell us in the last year of his life, when I am healed, I am going to go back to that orphanage and spend more time in my retirement. Now, Howard had faith, and there were many prayers for his healing. And we know now that he is, of course, totally healed as he's with the Lord in heaven. But he had faith that maybe there was more time for him, and our prayers were enough for him. All kinds of churches in this community were involved in the prayer ministry for Howard. It wasn't just this church. But that never happened. But Howard found in his faith and in the prayers of God's people the strength to go on every day, living the best he could until the bus left. And that's what dear life, this doctor tells us in her book. Live your life right up to the end as fully as you can. And even though Howard grew weaker and weaker, he was always open to us visiting. And other people would come and he'd go and see them as much as he could. And he would share his thoughts with us, how he was doing, never complained about pain, and had this steadfast, firm faith. And all he was concerned about was leaving Chris behind. And that was the hardest thing for him. But Howard was nurtured in his faith. During that period of time, he was open to the Spirit and to the Lord and the love of God's people. And I saw him growing spiritually, as did you folks and many others, as he drew closer to the Lord. And there was a light that shone in his eyes, even though he was so tired, and his energy was gone. So he, in a sense, is a person I can identify with. He wasn't perfect, but he had a heart to do God's will and be God's person. He found a way to use the gifts that he had in every arena that he found himself in. He tried his best to represent the presence of God and to be the presence of God where he was. And so that gives me encouragement that maybe at my age, in this stage, I can be renewed, and there can be fresh salt and light go out from my life and from us as a couple. Because I think we need to be reminded occasionally of what's really important. Let me tell you why you are here, Peterson says in translation. Let me tell you why you're here. Wow, that's pretty sharp, isn't it? Okay, how much time have I had? 18 minutes already, I think. Concluding words here. Paul's word. Jesus says, let me tell you who you are. The Apostle Paul in Romans 12:1 says, so here's what I want you to do. And it's a wonderful passage. I had this phrase running through my mind, your ordinary everyday life. I had to look it up on the internet to see what verse it was, what chapter, verse, what book it was found in, and I found it in Romans 12:1. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you take your everyday, ordinary life. Okay? Do you have an everyday, ordinary life? Oh man, it's pretty ordinary sometimes, isn't it? Take your everyday, ordinary life. Your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Wow. And God is able to take what we place in His hands, isn't He? And every step of the way. And yet it takes so long. Oh, Lord, I wish it would happen. Great things would happen quicker. But it's a great process, isn't it? And one looks back on Howard's life and sees how he had impacted others with the presence of God. Yes, we are to shake and shine in this world, in our ordinary, everyday lives. I wonder if we could read the discipline now. Do you have the discipline that goes along with this on incarnational tradition? It's so nice to have the screen there. Okay, let's read it together. The discipline. By God's grace, I will joyfully seek to show forth the presence of God in all that I am, in all that I do, in all that I say. Do you buy into that? Are you going to make a commitment to that? I'm trying to read this along with the prayer as regularly as I can remember. And we're going to have the prayer in just a moment here that concludes this time. But Jesus doesn't let us off the hook too easily, because He says, what if the salt loses its saltiness? What if I become insipid in my life and there's no flavoring to add to the culture, to the world? There's no presence of God that really communicates. What if I become insipid, tasteless, flavorless, boring? Have you lost your salt? Have I lost my salt? Has the church lost its salt? And if so, what do we do about it? Maybe the house church gatherings could grapple with that question. Are we really salty? And if not, what can we do about it? One of the things we can do about it is pray this kind of prayer. And of course, there are disciplines that go along with all of these traditions, so they're all helpful. And here's a prayer I would like us to read together and conclude with that this morning. Okay? A prayer for incarnational living. Lord, make my life a window for your light to shine through, and a mirror reflecting your great love to all I meet. And again, Lord, make my life a window for your light to shine through, and a mirror reflecting your great love to all I meet. So this week, let us shake and shine and serve this present age in which we live for God's glory. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Thank you for the stories. And let me just encourage you, those of you who are part of house churches, that in the bulletin, we've gone through 3 traditions so far. So in the bulletin, the 3 disciplines, I think I put them in there. Did I do that? Or was I just thinking it? Yeah, they're on the back page. So the disciplines are in there, and this would be something that would be really good week by week when your house churches meet, that we encourage each other on, spur each other on to love and good deeds, the scriptures talk about. So even reading these out loud and thinking about how can we encourage each other in this discipline in each of those areas, that would be a great thing for us to do as house churches together.